Good afternoon. Thank you for your interest in our Public Pre-K Technical Assistance series. My name is Nicole Medor. I'm the Early Childhood Specialist on the Early Learning team at our Department of Education. Alongside me works Leanne Larson. She's the Director of the Early Learning team. Marcy Whitcomb is our Public Pre-K Consultant. Nina Cunningham is our Head Start State Collaboration Director. And Jane Kersling is our Pre-K Grant Coordinator. So a few housekeeping items. This link here will bring you to a resource document that houses links and additional resources that are related to the Pre-K Technical Assistance series. Our agenda today will be to review our topics, identify documents or expectations that the Department of Education oversees, any important dates that might be tied to these expectations, and then of course time for discussion and questions. Our topic today is curriculum and assessment. So we'll start with curriculum, a few expectations that the Department of Education oversees. So first and foremost is the guidelines that are set forth in Chapter 124, specifically Section 4, which highlights curriculum. So the school administrative unit has to inform parents and students of the curriculum, your instructional expectations, and your assessment system. Preschool programs must demonstrate curriculum practice that aligns with our main early learning and development standards. We also call that our MELDs. And it must be appropriate for the age and developmental level of the students. Teachers must organize space and select materials in all content and developmental areas that are highlighted in the MELDs. In addition to Chapter 124, our team has also created a Pre-K guidebook. There is a link for this in that resource document that I mentioned earlier. And this guidebook is really meant to highlight and sort of explain in greater detail high quality elements of public preschool classrooms. So when it comes to curriculum in the guidebook, it tells us that the DOE, we define curriculum as the school administrative unit's written document that includes the learning expectations for all children, for all domains of development, as indicated in our learning standards, which are the MELDs. So it's often confusing because folks think that or identify the MELDs as a curriculum or identify the MELDs as an assessment tool, when in fact the MELDs are just our standards. So similar to the main learning results in grades K-12, the MELDs highlight developmental expectations for children who between the ages of 3 to 5. So by the end of the school year, 4-year-olds who attended the pre-K classroom setting should be able to master or be well on their way to the development standards that are in the MELDs. So in comparison, your curriculum that you choose is what you use to instruct students and to support their own growth and development in a variety of learning domains. And through that instruction and through those experiences in the classroom, students will then master or be well on their way to mastering the standards that are highlighted in the MELDs. The Pre-K guidebook also tells us that curriculum should reflect continuous, sequential, and intentional instruction, again, aligned with the MELDs. So choosing curriculum. There's a lot of options that are available to school administrative units throughout Maine. The Department of Education does not pre-approve curriculum. It's truly a locally determined choice that schools and curriculum directors and administrators work to make a decision based on their community, the needs of their students and the needs of their families. So as in preschool, we do ask that whatever curriculum the school decides to adopt, that it meets some of this criteria. So the first and foremost is that it must be evidence-based. So what does that mean? So the U.S. Department of Education defines evidence-based as an activity, strategy, or intervention that demonstrates a statistically significant effect on improving student outcomes or other relevant outcomes based on at least one of the following criteria. One, it's strong evidence from at least one well-designed and well-implemented experimental study. Two, moderate evidence from at least one well-designed and well-implemented quasi-experimental study. Or three, promising evidence from at least one well-designed and well-implemented correlational study with statistical controls for selection bias. Or it demonstrates a rationale based on high-quality research findings or positive evaluation that such activity, strategy, or interventions is likely to improve student outcomes or other relevant outcomes, and includes ongoing efforts to examine the effects of such activity, strategy, or intervention. So when you're selecting a curriculum, there's a variety of curriculum available to be purchased or adopted throughout the United States. As long as it is evidence-based, that's sort of the first criteria that we want to assure, then we can move on to the next step criteria. And that is that it's vertically aligned. And that means that whatever it is you're doing for instruction practices in pre-K, align with instructional practices that are happening in the other grades. So specifically kindergarten. It's really meant to prepare the students for education at a later age, at a later grade. So whatever's happening in pre-K will roll up and continue to build in kindergarten. Whatever's happening in kindergarten will roll up and continue to build in first grade, etc. What we want to avoid is having one set of curriculum instructed in one grade, an entirely different one instructed in the next grade. It's really going to be confusing for students, especially in the beginning of the school year as they transition to new teachers and new spaces, to adapt to a whole new set of sort of teaching framework. So our early learning team at the DOE, we strongly recommend that elementary teaching teams work to select curricula that aligns with instruction in other grades. We also want to be really mindful of selecting too many curricula. So in the early years, pre-K specifically, curriculum tends to be whole child, comprehensive, and sort of encompasses all domains of learning. If not all domains of learning, certainly many of the domains that we have highlighted in our standards, in our MELDs. But what happens often is schools will adopt one curriculum to instruct math, for example, a whole nother curriculum to instruct early learning or reading skills and literacy skills, for example, and then maybe a whole nother curriculum to instruct social emotional learning, etc. So that can be a lot of work for a teacher to organize and plan for, versus purchasing or adopting one curriculum that addresses all domains of learning throughout its components throughout the school day. So some other examples of this might be, you might be familiar with the OWL curriculum. That stands for Opening the World of Learning. The OWL curriculum is a whole child curriculum that addresses all domains of learning, versus Building Blocks Math. Building Blocks Math only instructs lessons around mathematical skills in young children. So having too many curricula can be problematic, not just in pre-K, but in other grades as well. Some curriculum resources. So there is a document called the Curriculum Consumer Report, and this is linked in the resource document I mentioned at the beginning of our time today. The link is also spelled out here. This is a really great resource that West Ed has assisted in putting together. They've reviewed a variety of different early childhood curriculum, and they have rated it on a scale that looks at whole child development, domains of learning, its appropriateness for the age level, and different things like that. So you can really get sort of a good visual and a good understanding of what each curriculum addresses, and on a scale, if it addresses it at a high rate, a low rate, or somewhere in between. And then a school can make some decisions based on different resources and reviews that come with that report. There's also a social emotional curriculum consumer report that does the same thing for specific social emotional curriculum. Our Maine Department of Education has worked over the last few years to create instructional programs that schools can adopt at no cost. They're open source and they are available on our website here. The one for pre-K is called PreK for Me. We also have K for Me, which is a kindergarten instructional program, and are now piloting first grade for Me, which is, of course, for first grade. This was created alongside the Boston Public Schools curriculum that they worked to implement in the city in Massachusetts. So folks from Boston worked very closely with us, as well as other educators from across Maine, to develop and sort of edit the Boston curriculum to be more appropriate for students and experiences that we have here in Maine. So you can check that out there. There's a lot of additional resources and training that comes along with PreK for Me, all of which are housed or highlighted on the PreK for Me site. Like I mentioned, Boston Public Schools, this is another open source curriculum. There are some links and some documents that are only accessible by Boston Public Schools educators and administrators. However, this site does a really nice job of explaining the work they've done in Boston. It also gives results from a variety of different studies and evaluations that they've had done, as well as resources to implement their instructional programs in your classrooms. So moving on to assessment. Similarly to curriculum, there are specific assessment expectations. In Chapter 124, again in Section 4, it tells us that programs must provide periodic and ongoing research-based assessment of children's learning and development that, 1, documents each child's interests, needs, and progress to help plan instruction, relying mostly on demonstrated performance of authentic activities. Assessment that 2 includes children's work samples, observations, and anecdotal notes, as well as checklists and inventories, parent conference notes, photographs, video, health screening reports, and referral records for support services. That 3 communicates with families regularly to ensure connection between home and school, including providing interpreters and translators as needed. And 4 aligns again with our early learning and development standards and are used to inform curriculum and instruction. Assessment must 5 be informed by family culture, experiences, children's abilities and disabilities, and home language. As well as 6, assessment must be used in settings familiar to the children. So opposed to taking students out of the classroom one at a time to be assessed on their skills in an area of the building that students are not familiar with, we highly encourage that assessment happens in the classroom during their regular school day, among their peers and among familiar adults. Assessment must also inform activities to support planning for individual children. In the PreK guidebook, we see that programs are required to utilize research-based assessment tools, that child assessments inform teaching staff of the growth of child over time and give information that is essential to the planning of activities for individual children. Quality assessment tools and practices include child observation, work samples, anecdotal notes, checklists, photographs, and video. That's also highlighted in the Chapter 124. The assessment tools that SAUs use need to be aligned with our MELDs. Can't say that enough. And assessments should be completed across the program year at designated times. So this isn't a one and done assessment. This is happening every day across the school year. Oftentimes schools with pre-K programs will have either 3 or 4 checkpoints where they're gathering all of their data on student assessment and reporting out to administrators, reporting out to families. That's up to school districts. The tools that schools use to assess is also up to school districts. Again, our early learning team at the department does not pre-approve specific assessment tools. We just ask that they meet the criteria in Chapter 124, which is ongoing, based on observation, informs the instruction of the teachers, etc. So unlike curriculum, assessment tools that meet our requirements, there's not as many to be purchased. Some of the three most popular ones are here. There's Teaching Strategies Gold Assessment, Core Advantage High Scope Assessment, and the Work Sampling System. So the first two, Gold and the Core, were originally created to meet the assessment needs of teachers who were implementing specific curriculum. So Gold was originally designed to assess instruction through creative curriculum, and Core was designed to do assessment through the high scope curriculum. You don't have to use Gold with creative curriculum or Core with high scope. You can use Gold and Core with any curriculum because it is a whole child comprehensive program that assesses all the domains of learning of a young child. Similarly to Work Sampling System. So we often will hear schools sort of navigating between these three options to make a decision that will work best for their teachers and their instructional programs. With Teaching Strategies, we do have a statewide umbrella contract with that company. It allows public schools to access the Gold assessment tool at a reduced per student cost. So if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, you can absolutely reach out to me or navigate the Teaching Strategies Gold site. You can find our state of Maine and you can sign up right through them at a reduced per student cost. So any questions that folks have around choosing curriculum or choosing assessment should be directed to any one of us on the early learning team. We're all always available and happy to navigate these decisions with you. Again, it's not something that we can pre-approve or tell you which to purchase one over the other. However, it is a conversation that we enjoy having to assure that teachers and administrators feel supported in the decisions that they're making, and to also implement a high quality best practice in your schools that is vertically aligned to other grades. So we always encourage folks to reach out and ask, never assume one thing over another. We're happy to sort of be thought partners and provide any additional resources that folks may need.